Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. We are in Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to start talking about Abraham and how he was living by faith. I'll read out of the NIV here first, just read through the text we're looking at. It's going to take us several weeks to get through Abraham because, well, we're in no hurry. There's a lot to look at also, and it doesn't hurt to do a little bit of history. But one of the things that we've got in these verses is we're going to have, they're not going to be conflicts, but we're definitely looking at two different perspectives in three different ways. One is going to be talking about Abraham received. One place is going to say he received it in chapter 6, but later on in this verse 13, it's going to say all these people living by faith did not receive. So it's not a contradiction. It's just looking at it from two different perspectives and what's taking place. We've got God living in our lives right now, but it makes it very clear that this is not the fulfillment. This is not the end. We are here in a process. So God is faithful. He gives us his word today. He's true to his word, but yet the full manifestation is not going to take place. It cannot take place here because we are still fallen. Yes, we're saved, but we're in the process of being conformed. The very fact that you're still in process of being conformed means you're not fully saved. Now, when I say not fully saved, you are fully saved. You're righteous in Christ. You're fully saved, but you are not fully redeemed. Your body still has a sin nature. You're going to be delivered from death and decay and from this physical body and from this the sin nature. You will have a resurrected body. So we're saved spiritually in the past. We're currently being saved in our soul right now as we renew our mind and conform into the image of Christ. But we will ultimately be saved when we are glorified at the resurrection. So that put things in. There's different ways of looking at it. So one, received. He did receive, but he didn't receive. Also, he's going to be following the Lord, understanding, but not knowing where he's going. So in one sense, he understands the promise. I can trust this. But on the other side, he doesn't understand. He doesn't know where he's going and what's going to happen next. And if you've had any experience following the Lord, you know that's true. It's like, I'm going to trust Jesus. Well, wait, just a minute. Guarantee what's going to happen. Well, there's no guarantee. The guarantee is the Creator, the Savior, Jesus Christ and his nature. You're now in this righteous light. This is where your life is going to be lived and developed. Well, what's going to happen? Well, that's the unknown. You understand who you're with, but you don't understand all the details. So it's also, that's kind of like that. Well, do you understand what's going on? Yes, I understand. So you know where you're going? Have no idea. So it's like, well, what are you saying? Okay, and you understand this. And then there's going to be a couple promises taking place right here. There's going to be the promise of a land that's called the Palestinian covenant. There's going to be the promise of a nation that Jesus or the Lord is going to give Abraham a nation. And eventually there's going to be the Davidic promise that we're not talking about here, and that there's going to be a king from the nation ruling in the land. These are, in a sense, physical, and they're going to take place here. But yet, as you go through these verses, you know, we're talking about the promised land, we're talking about the nation being formed and all of this, but then all of a sudden, it says, but Abraham was not looking for the land, he was looking for a city. Oh, you mean Jerusalem? Well, no, he was in the city of Salem. He met the king of Salem at that time, Melchizedek, in his lifetime. It's very clearly he's looking for a city, and it says, whose architect and builder, whose foundation and builder is the Lord. It's not on this earth. So we're talking about the land of Israel. We're talking about the people of Israel. We're talking about a king, a Davidic kingship that's going to take place on this earth. But yet in the midst of it, he's looking for an eternal city, which he can't get until sometime in the future. Which, again, it's not really confusing, but you do have to understand he's receiving some things, but he's not receiving this. He's understanding, but he doesn't know. And he's being promised 3 covenants are being made. These are unconditional covenants. They're based not on Abraham's obedience, and this is one thing we always got to point out when we talk about the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant that God is making with Abraham, you can sink your teeth into it because God says, I'm going to give you this land. I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to eventually, you'll talk about, put the son of David on the throne. And there's no connection to obedience. Where the Mosaic covenant with Moses on Mount Sinai is all based on a covenant, a contract, like what we've talked about before, like if you buy a house. You can have the house if you give me this much money. Well, if you don't give me this much money, it's still my house. You can't have it. It's conditional. So the Mosaic covenant was conditional. God says, I will do this for you, but understand, you're going to have to live up to this standard right here. When you fail, then I'm walking away. So if the breaking of the Mosaic covenant would take place on the people's part, and the Lord was, I'm not going to bless you because I'd be in violation of the covenant because you've got to do these things. And Paul makes it very clear in the book of Galatians, the contrast between the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. And it answers that question people get today. Sometimes they get confused in Christianity, and they want to go back to becoming Jewish. And they want to go back to the Mosaic law. It's like, now, we are of the faith of Abraham, and Paul makes it very clear you can enter into the Abrahamic covenant by faith in Christ, and that's all explained in the New Testament. It says, chapter 12, the beginning of chapter 12 of Genesis, all nations will be blessed through Abraham and the Abrahamic covenant. It says it right there. All nations are going to be blessed, both temporal and eternally, through the Abrahamic covenant, because it is an unconditional covenant. God is going to do something through this man, Abraham, and his nation. So we can buy into, and that's where Jesus comes as fulfillment of it, we can become members of this covenant. And that's what you want. It's based on faith, and it's fulfilled through Jesus Christ's work on the cross and the other promises that God is going to fulfill. Then they want to go further. I want to become Jewish and start following the Mosaic law. Whoa, stop. Paul says right in the Galatians, anyone who's under the law is under a curse. Well, I'm going to do these things and get blessed by God. Well, you're right, that's the covenant, but you're not going to do these things and you're going to be cursed by God, because remember, there's back-to-back sides of it. There's, you do these things, you'll be blessed. You don't do them, you're going to get cursed. Okay, I want the blessings, I'll do these things. No, stop. You will not do those. You'll fail at those things, and you'll end up in the curse. Well, I'm going to be very obedient. That's what they said at Mount Sinai, and they weren't. So don't go Mosaic. Go Abrahamic. And it's like, that's exactly what the book of Galatians is about. And that's not even radical teaching. What's radical about it is no one understands it. What's radical about it is you have to tell people that are going to try to follow the dietary laws, they're going to become Jewish again and start following the laws of Moses. It's like the New Testament clearly eliminates the law of Moses. It's like it was there for a purpose, leading. Even the law of Moses says something was going to come and replace it. And that's what we've been talking about in this book. In fact, that's what the book of Hebrews is about, writing to people who were under the Mosaic covenant, and they're telling them it's time to leave that covenant and join the new covenant, which is Jeremiah 31:31, that fulfills the Abrahamic covenant, that the seed of the woman has come and provided the means of salvation. So anyway, that's what we're going to see right here. And I'm going to start reading in chapter 11, verse 8. And remember, we've already talked about the people before the flood. It'd be, I'm trying to think who was before the flood. Abel, Noah, before Noah, Enoch. Okay, I mean, I had to shift gears. My mind's over here, and I had to go back like 2 verses, and I couldn't remember it. And that's something. Okay, what a brilliant mind. Chapter 11, verse 8. It says, and now we're switching into a new person. This is going to go on all the way down. If you look all the way down to verse 20, where it says, by faith Isaac, and then verse 21, by faith Jacob, and then verse 22, by faith Joseph. So you got Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, each with their own verse, just basically saying what they did in a very quick summary, one sentence. And then in verse 23, we jump to Moses, and there's a little part about Moses. But notice between verse 7 and verse 20, verse 8 and verse 20, it's all Abraham. So that's why we're going to spend a little bit of time on this, because this is really the foundation of the Jewish religion, the Jewish faith, which is becoming, or has become, the Christian faith as this is fulfilled. But here we go, chapter 11, verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. And that same promise is the Abrahamic covenant. It went from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and that's very important to understand. It didn't go to Ishmael. It didn't go to Esau. It went from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and then the 12 tribes were split up, and they received the benefits of that. And then we got a tough verse. Well, okay, wait, nope, I skipped ahead. Jacob, who were heirs of the same promise. Verse 10, for he was looking forward to the city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. So in one sense, we're very clearly talking about the promised land that he's living in, but he didn't live there, he didn't settle down because he was looking for something bigger than the promised land. Yet the promised land is still something God's going to bring about. He's going to give them the land. But Abraham knew there was something bigger than this land. There was, well, an eternal city with a foundation whose architect and builder is God. Now we've got a tough verse right here, and we'll talk about it in the future. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, was unable to become a father because he considered him faithful who made the promise. Now you may have footnotes, you may even have a different reading in there with the word Abraham and Sarah getting turned around, because there is some confusion in that verse, and we're going to have 4 or 5 different ways of resolving it. I think when you look at them, it's going to be clear how to resolve it. It's not a mistake, it's just in translation, what do you do with these words? But anyway, it puts Abraham and Sarah in there also. Verse 12, and so from this one man, and he as good as dead, he was 99 when Isaac was born, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. Then verse 13, all these people, and that we're talking about here, would, if we go back to, let me do it again here, Seth and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah, that's all we've mentioned so far. All these people were living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. Now remember, if you have received the promise, you no longer have faith or hope because you have the thing. I've got the manifestation. You may still have faith in the person that gave it to you or hope for other things, but this thing is manifested. These people all died in faith, still holding on to a promise because they never got what they were promised. But yet, God was very faithful to do everything he promised in their lives. And so all these people, and it says earlier, Abraham, in chapter 6, Abraham received what he was hoping for. But here it says all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And that seeing and welcoming them from a distance, that goes right back to the things you're receiving things from God right now today. You are in relationship with God. Things are happening in your life. God is faithful to you, but he's also promised you things that you can't have here. They will not fit here. They're not part of this side of history. You can only see them from afar, and you can only see them by faith, and that's not wishful thinking. That's trusting the Word of God, knowing this is absolutely true. Someday I'm going to have this, but I'm going to have to go there. Time is going to have to take me there. God is going to have to take me. God is going to have to bring it. It's going to be another dimension. And these people received the things from God, but here it says they did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, and they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. That's important. That's what Peter addresses also. Paul lived that way, and that is the healthy Christian view of life. That they admitted they were aliens and strangers on earth. Yes, you are born into this age. You have a physical body, a physical presence. You have to be a good citizen. You have to be a good parent. You have to be a good employee. You have to participate. You can't just zone out. You are really here in reality. But this is not the final destination. You're just passing through. Don't build your eternal home here. Don't build all your hopes and dreams here. You're just passing through. And so if an alien were living here among us, they would have another land that they come from or land they're going to, but they would still have to eat and participate and go through the daily routine of reality, but they wouldn't have the same rights. Again, we're talking about a nation that is balanced. We're not talking about our twisted postmodern age. I mean, yeah, some of these things, so many of these things are going to lose communication ability because what aliens have the same rights? Okay, in the real world they don't. Okay, just like this is my house and Tony's got certain privileges and rights in this house, you don't have them. Why can't we have the same? Because it's not your stinking house. Okay, it's like that's not a radical thought in reality. But when we get into the postmodern age, and everybody starts singing Imagine with John and Yoko, imagine there's no possessions, and everybody owns everybody else's stuff. It's like, wouldn't it be beautiful? It's like, no, that's not going to work. There's still going to be someone that takes most of it. Okay, nonetheless. So I had to stop because we use the word alien, and that's such like a trigger word for people today. But in reality, there are boundaries and borders, and then within those boundaries and borders, you are a member, and you have certain privileges and rights, can own property. But Abraham came to this land as a foreigner, as an alien. He didn't fight for it. They just let him travel in it and camp in it. And we've talked about before what he was doing. He had a lot of people. It wasn't just him and Sarah. He had an entourage. Not really an entourage. He was more like a sheik. I mean, he had possessions. He had cattle. And when he came in, he had servants, if you want to call them slaves, throw that out there. But he had people that were born into his household that were born as servants, and they lived as servants, and they took care of his stuff. It's going to get to the point here that his nephew is going to also have possessions, and they're going to be so many that the land can't sustain them. When was the last time you had so many possessions that your house could not sustain all your possessions and you needed to find more property? It's like, well, in my case, if that would happen, I've just got a lot of junk I need to throw away. Yeah, I mean, if I'm a hoarder, yeah, I've run out of room. But they had so many cattle, so many possessions that they had a split. So again, get this perspective. Abraham, as we're going to see, and we've talked about before, is going to end up going to war against kings and defeating them and coming back. He's got treaties with kings, and the kings were not necessarily kings of nations or empires. They were kings of cities and the local area around the city. Like Melchizedek was king of Salem, and Abraham, it appears, would provide protection around the area. He was a warrior, and you can see he's going to have men trained and living in his own camp. Some 300 men are going to be called to arms. They're going to mount up and go to war against 4 invading kings from the east and defeat them in the first recorded night battle in history, and then come back with all the possessions. So Abraham had a role in his society. He wasn't just they wanted him and Sarah just living by faith, just eating the little berries that grew on the bushes and sleeping in the dirt. No, they came in and they had a purpose. They had covenants. They had treaties. And when it needed, they could protect the people they were responsible for. And that was a role in that culture, that in the Middle East at that time, where they would be basically warriors that would, for service, to use this land for my grazing my cattle, I'll protect your city. Basically, that's what it comes down to. I'll protect this city if I can use Melchizedek's land. And he says, you can go ahead and live here, but if we ever need you for protection, well, I'm here for you. And so that was kind of more like what Abraham was in for. You can see this as you go through the story. It makes more sense. You get that Sunday school image of just an old man on a camel with Sarah wandering around. It's like, and then he does these things. It's like nothing makes sense. But he knew that he did not try to conquer land. He did not try to take the land. He didn't build a city. He lived in tents, content to be where God wanted him to be, to do what God had called him to do, waiting for the day that my people will live and own and occupy this city and all of this land. Now, that wasn't going to be in his day. God makes it very clear. It's going to even be 400 years before your nation's big enough to come back and take it, but they will. But God was providing for Abraham, and Abraham was looking forward to temporal promises being fulfilled, and eternal promises. Now that's the introduction. It would be fun to spend more time on that. But here we go. Verse 16, instead of receiving the promises, they were looking for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So right in the midst of this whole discussion of Abraham, the conversation, we'll have to spend, in a couple of weeks, we'll spend time talking about it. It was not the land. That was a temporary thing, but there's a future for them, that God is preparing a city for these people that are living by faith as aliens. If you're passing through this age as an alien, realizing, yes, we got to be responsible. I do have a house, but I realize this is not my eternal dwelling. I realize that this is passing away, and this is not the most important thing in my life. I need a house. It's nice to have a house this morning. But it's passing away. There's something bigger coming. And it's interesting he calls it a city, because sometimes in the Bible, city is negative. That's where all corruption breaks out. You know, Babylon, the city; Rome, the city; even the Tower of Babel. First thing Cain does is go off and build a city. And so the cities become the place of corruption. What's interesting here is there's a city that's the architect, the designer, and the one who actually did the activity and did the building is God himself, and that's the city that we will dwell in. And so it's going to be, in Revelation, it's called the home of righteousness. So it's going to be just the same ideal of a city of everything's together and everything's functioning well, but this is going to be sinless, full of light, and the home of righteousness. And that can't happen in this age. We can have bits and pieces of it. You can have God shining through different people and God's blessing, but everything in this age is going to collapse. And that's radical thinking. I mean, if you could somehow get a group of people together and begin to realize everything in this age is already corrupted, but we have God's direction, God's plan on what is absolute, what is true, what is righteous, and how we can function here, even as broken beings. It's like he's not going to remove the sin nature from any of us until we cross over into eternity. Even at the resurrection is where the resurrected body, we will be free from the sin nature. I think once you pass and you lay your body down, you're free of the sin nature, obviously, in eternity. But with that understanding, it puts it right on the track. It's not like I'm going to pick out, well, some of you need to change. Some of you are corrupt. It's kind of like, well, then we identify the group that is corrupt and put them over here. You're the problem, but the rest of us are fine. It's like, well, now that's going to become a problem because that's not true. Every one of us has a sin nature. Every one of us is corrupt. Every one of us is waiting for the eternal city. God is not going to look at any one of us and go, well, you know, bless your heart. You're doing so good. I'm going to bring it to you. It's like the kingdom's not coming to us individually in that sense of where we're in paradise. You're living, being conformed into the image of Jesus Christ, making correct decisions. That's possible. But you're always in a situation surrounded by corruption and within you a corrupt nature, that the only thing that's protecting you is the Word of God, the Spirit of God, God's presence himself, and if you want to add to your own effort, the decisions you make. But even then, corruption is going to overtake you. You're going to grow old and die eventually. It's like, yeah, but I made all the right decisions. I only ate granola bars. It's like, okay, I know, but okay, you're never going to escape this. And so if we understand that, we could go into every situation realizing there's corruption. And in reality, when a person is living in reality, they realize that. Tony and I have a marriage. We have a good marriage, but we know both of us still have a sin nature. And so we can help each other. We can check each other. A lot of times we just kind of forgive each other, just kind of overlook it. Or, well, okay, she forgives me. I've never done it. I don't need to worry about it, you know. But no, I mean, it's like there's a place where you have an expectation, but then you can also have expectations that are beyond reality. It's like Tony's a beautiful wife, but at the same time, she's still a fallen creature. And so there's going to be times where she's not 100%. And I'm saying the same thing about me. I'm using that as an illustration. If you go into a business deal, that's why there's contracts. That's why there's courts. That's why we're in a corrupt world. So that's way off subject, but at the same time, it's not, because Abraham could not have received the fullness. These people right here, All these people, verse 13, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them from and welcomed them from a distance. How come? They've got to be at a distance. You've got to go into another dimension where the sin nature and corruption of this age has passed away before you can actually enjoy them. And they can't come here. With that understanding, we're all waiting. Now, we go into verse 17. We're not in that verse 17. We're going to stop at 16. And again, this is going to take a couple weeks. But notice what happens in verse 17. We're still talking about Abraham, but it switches subjects. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promise, or had received the promises, was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Again, it's another great contrast. Isaac was the promised son, and it's through Isaac all these promises are going to take place. And God says, "I want you to sacrifice him." And again, that's a stumbling block, because now it's calling for a human sacrifice, and God forbids human sacrifice. One of the problems with the Canaanites and what was going on there. But he's going to offer him. But you've got to think and understand Abraham's full understanding. Again, he understood, but he didn't know everything. Like, for example, he doesn't know anything about Jesus Christ. He doesn't know anything as far as coming and dying on the cross. But was he thinking, and we'll talk about this too, well, was he going to provide Isaac as a sacrifice, and then God was going to raise him up from the dead? Because if he sacrifices Isaac, all the promises are dead. So Isaac's got to stay alive, but God wants me to sacrifice. It's so you got these contrasts. So I sacrifice him, and he raised him from the dead. Well, that's exactly what happened with Jesus. And so we'll talk about that when we get there. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead. Meaning, he reasoned, okay, he says, here's the promise, here's the command. They're opposites. Unless, logic would say, if you do the math, that's what the word reasoning means. Reason, it's he did the math. Well, then God's going to have to raise him from the dead, because these promises are eternally true. Okay, I was going to do that, Abraham would say, and he started the process. He who had received the promise was about to sacrifice the one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. That's what the author writes right here. That's the end of Isaac, or Abraham. Then verse 20, by faith Isaac, 21, by faith Jacob, by faith Joseph, verse 22, and finally verse 23, by faith Moses. So that is our text right there that we're looking at, and particularly these verses, and we'll be spending some time in those. I want to now look real quickly at the notes, and then if you look on page 1 of the notes, I want to go through that outline of Abraham's life, and I'm not sure, look at that right there. Abraham's life in the book of Genesis begins in chapter 11 and goes to chapter 23. Are you thinking 5 years right there? So obviously that's going to be, I want to at least touch on it so you see these things. So a lot of times, I'm even talking to myself. I mean, I've taught through Genesis. I've read these accounts. I know this. But even every time I go back and I read through them again, it's kind of like, oh, I forgot, or I didn't know, or now something fits that didn't. And so, or there's things that are missing that you just didn't catch the first 20 times. So we're going to have to somehow review that without spending 5 years or even 5 weeks going through that. And important to me, at least, and again, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about myself having a good understanding of it. Chapter 7 of Acts, verses 2 through 8, that's when Stephen, who was one of those that was called to wait on the tables for the disciples, who says it's not right for us to neglect the teaching of the word and wait on tables. Stephen was called to wait on the tables. Well, then he began to teach also, and he was out publicly making speeches, and got called into the Sanhedrin, and the high priest accused him of wanting to tear the temple down. And so they're going to stone him, but he has a chance to defend himself. And he makes this statement right here, this is just part of his speech. It's a great speech. Luke records a speech. Stephen gets stoned to death outside, probably in the Kidron Valley, going out the Lion's Gate, which would be the Lion's Gate today. Chapter 7, verses 2 through 8, Stephen says all these things, and he's talking about Abraham, and we'll want to look at that. At the bottom of page 1, I've got Hebrews 6:15. I've referred to this. This is where Abraham received what was promised. Hebrews 6:15 says, so after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. Now, in that case, what he received was the son Isaac. So, in a sense, you could say not in a sense, but the key factor, the key promise that was fulfilled was Abraham received a son. And in that son, all those other promises that he never received that were temporal were going to come through that son and that son's future. So that would be the sense Abraham received what was promised. He received a son physically in this earth. Hebrews 11:13, and I just read those verses, Abraham died in faith, not having received these things, because I just read it. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised. So right there, that's a good time to stop for just a moment and put that in a frame. On Monday nights, we're going through the Brace for Impact book, and that's that concept of sometimes there are promises that are for now, but there are also promises that are for later, that you can't get these. These are from another, you're not ready for these. But there are promises now also. And it's important to distinguish that when God talks about things, it talks about, Paul tells Timothy to rightly divide the word of truth. Rightly divide is a word for, we've talked about that before. Divide is a word used for cutting meat, like a butcher cutting meat. Rightly cut the animal, the correct portions of the meat. Rightly divide the word of truth. And one way of rightly dividing the Bible is to realize there are promises you cannot have now. You cannot handle it. You're not ready for it. Your nature is still in a corrupted state. You're still in a fallen world. These are going to come later. God gave you the promise. Wait for it. Be encouraged by it. Set your eyes on it. You can see it from afar. This is yours. You can't have it yet. But there's also promises that he tells you, ask, seek, find. You will get that. God is active now in your life. And one of the things that happens in cults or false teaching is they switch these around. They bring these over here and they start trying to make these promises manifest here. And in reality, these promises don't fit in this reality. But by bringing them over here, that will lead to more false doctrine. That will lead to frustration. That will lead to people losing their faith. Well, I trusted God for this, and nothing's happened. Look what's happened. Just bad. It's like, this is not for today. Who told you this was going to happen? Well, either bad teaching or not rightly dividing the word of truth. Okay. And so that's going to be an important issue right here. I want to, how do I want to do this? I've got like 16 directions I could go right now, and I'm going to go this way. In the middle of page 1, there is Acts chapter 7, and I want to read this because there you can see, I don't have any maps on here. There's maps in your Bibles. I should have given you a map. The Euphrates River, the Tigris River, Persian Gulf. Here's Ur. Ur's been excavated. That's where Abraham is said to have come from. This is Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is the land between the two rivers. That's what the word means. This runs up here. This would be right about here today is the border of Turkey and Syria. We talk about Mount Zaphon and Ugarit. That's right about here, maybe even up here a little further, right about there. The city of Ur, or Haran, is right here. Haran. And this would be, down here would be the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea, Jerusalem right here. This is, in a sense, the promised land, Canaan, where Abraham's going to come. Abimelech is going to live right here. That is what is called the king of the Philistines. But we need to be careful right here historically, because the Philistines are clearly in the Bible. It refers to them. And now, archaeologically, they are the sea people that fought the Egyptians, and they weren't not just boats that came across and invaded the Egyptians. Things have been uncovered, especially the last 80 years, these people come, just like the Bible says, they came from Crete, or they came from Greece. And we're talking about the whole area up in here, the islands, but also Greece and the area here. And they came not just by boat, but they came by land. And that city of Ugarit that we've talked about, that was discovered in 1929. It was defeated by the Sea People and buried, and no one knew about it. It was destroyed, and this all takes place. This invasion takes place around, we'll say, let's say 1200 is a nice time to identify something like this. And the Sea People, they came by land. They came with their families, because there's images of them with carts and children and their wives driving the carts and the warriors going forward. They came by sea, and they destroyed, they just wiped out the Hittites, the Ugarites, and they came down in this area. And so at this time of Abraham's time, which we're going to say is 2000 BC, and that's not radical. It's like, how do we even have a record? This must be made up legends. Well, we've got cuneiform texts from before that. I've got one right here this is right around the time of Abraham, maybe 1900 BC. It's authentic. It's an actual cuneiform. They found when they excavate these cities, when they excavated Ugarit or the Hittites, or they go over to they just find hundreds of them. Hundreds. Their tax receipts, their letters, their notes, their who owns what property. They're in the public files. So it's not like, well, how many of them are there in the world? Thousands of them. It's not maybe a good example, but it's India. Have you found an Indian head arrow? It's like, oh yeah, how many of them are there? Well, everybody had they made them every day. They're just go look for them. They're still, we haven't found them all. And the same thing, these things were like sticky notes. If your sticky note would be preserved for 4,000 years, think how many sticky notes. Look, we found another sticky. Look, I've got an authentic sticky note from 2022. It's like, whoa, where'd you get that? Well, there's only 3 left in the world. They didn't use them very often. They're very rare. Well, cuneiform tablets are the same thing. It's like they're old, but they were like the means of communication, and they'd send them back and forth. Notice how small it is. So it could travel. You could put it carry it somewhere, leave it, bring it to letter. Now there are bigger ones. They'd make monuments. Nonetheless, the Sea People come in about 1200 BC, right around there, and they have some success. The Egyptians have wall murals of them fighting the Sea People, and they're driven back, and they have to settle here. They came down the coast this way, and they fought the Egyptians, and they landed here in the land of the Philistines. And so they were Greeks. They intermarried, and archaeology is now proving this. They've excavated. They found a graveyard in Gath, in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, and their DNA is European. It matches, no doubt about it. I could go on and on about this. And so they're European. They brought European culture with them, which explains why, for example, David and Goliath met in a hero battle, where you send out your hero, we'll send out our hero. It sounds like you're reading something from Homer or something, because they were from Homer. And some people wonder how much Homer's stories have to do with the adventures of the Sea People being brought back to the homeland. And so you can see, and their DNA matches, their lifestyle matches. They had great success. They turned the tables on the Middle East here. Egypt held them off, but these people didn't. But in 2000 BC, Abimelech, when Abraham comes in here, the Philistines that we know in David's day are not here yet. So these were the Philistines that were there before the Greek invasion, and they intermarried with them, if that makes any sense at all. So we're going to talk about Abraham living here. But he's going to come from, and then right here in Jerusalem, there's going to be a king there named Melchizedek in a city called Salem. Melchizedek, Kizedek, or Melchi, it means king. Even in the New Testament, in the Jewish writings, it means the king. And Melchizedek means, Melchizedek, Zedek. Okay, here we go. Zedek means king. Melchi means righteousness. Abimelech, you're going to have Lech, L-E-C-H in there. That means king. Abimelech's name means son of the king. Okay, I got to get out of that. Otherwise, we're going to, okay. He comes from Ur. He's going to come up here to Haran, spend apparently 5 years in Haran. And it's going to say, and he got more people, more stuff. And he's going to come down now and come in, and he's following God, but he doesn't know exactly where he's going or exactly what's going to happen. He's got promises. Just like my life, just like your life, you follow God, and he maybe has an idea, And just like my life and your life, I've got an idea what God's doing, and all of a sudden you're doing something else. But he's still being faithful. You're still following, but it didn't go where I thought it was going to go. So this is what's going to take place. I want to read now in Acts chapter 7. This is Luke recording what takes place in 30 A.D., and this is Stephen, one of the disciples of the apostles. Good chance he knew Jesus, because Jesus had just died and resurrected, a month before, 2 months before. A couple months before. And he's talking in Jerusalem in front of the Sanhedrin and the high priest, and they do not correct him. This entire speech of Stephen, nothing is corrected until at the very end, where they cut him off, where he says something about Jesus and the resurrection, and that's where we've had enough, stone him. Now, so all this is now, reason I say that is what I'm going to read was accepted as truth and acceptable doctrine by the high priest and the ruling class of the Jews in 30 A.D. Brothers and fathers, hear me, Stephen says. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham. You get that? The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham. Now, appear would mean a manifestation, some kind of face-to-face, something that he was communicating with. Not just, it wasn't a voice in his heart. He didn't have an impression. When you say something like, I feel God is leading me, that could be the Spirit of God, that could be your conscience, that could be your recognition of the Word of God, or it could just be your guilty conscience thinking I should do this or I should not do that or whatever. I mean, that's an impression. And again, that's an impression. Where it's coming from, I can't judge that. This is not, he had an impression. He felt in his heart he should follow. The God of glory appeared to our father. If the God of glory appears to you, it's going to leave an impression, but you're not going to be following an impression. It's going to be like the God of glory appeared to me. So keep that in mind. This is not your average charismatic experience. I just felt the Lord leading me to whatever. He was not feeling any leading. It was just the Lord of God glory appeared to him. To our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, before he lived in Haran. So he's living here in Ur. We know that from other texts. He's going to move to Haran. What's interesting is when he sends away to get a bride for Isaac, he sends his servant, Eliezer, back up to where his people came from. He sends him back up here to Haran. He doesn't send him up and over to Mesopotamia, which you wonder, it just makes you wonder, is this his homeland and he was living in Ur and he went back to Haran? Because this is where all of his people are at. That's where Isaac goes. That's where Jacob goes. You see, they don't go back here. They go back here because this is home. They'd be like, you're going to go get a wife or your father's property or something from back home. This is where he went. He doesn't go over here. He goes for 3 generations, they went back up here, which is interesting for me because this is where Ugarit was still at. It was still functioning. It wasn't destroyed by the sea people yet. Mount Zaphon was right here. This was the home of all the gods in the north. And so this is a hot spot right here. And the Ugaritic text and the Hittite text, Hittites, they were people that were destroyed by the sea people that were mocked in the Bible. Genesis talks about the Hittites, and David had Uriah the Hittite working for him. Those people never existed until the 1800s when they excavated, and they found their the archive, which would be a storehouse of all the documents, of all the cuneiform tablets. They found that also, and all of a sudden the Hittites were a powerful people. We find out that they are fighting between Egypt and the Hittites. Were having a power struggle throughout this time period, and Ugarit was right in between them, kind of like a buffer zone, and so they were getting trade from the sea, they're getting trade from the east, and they were a buffer zone, both these people, the Egyptians and the Hittites, and so Ugarit was like, man, if you want to live somewhere, you want to live right here. This is where the action was. But anyway, this wasn't discovered until 1929, this one until the late 1800s, and when we find these writings, they have laws and rules. For example, I could, if I spend some time researching it, I could find it for you. But there's at least 20 or 50 examples of things you read in Genesis and you go, that's weird. Why would? And it's like, well, it's the law. For example, when Sarah's going to say to Abram, why don't you take Hagar, my handmaiden, and have a child with her, and that will be my child. That will be my inheritance. It's like, in these, right here, in the laws written on cuneiform tablets, if a wife is barren, she can take a servant and have the servant sleep with her husband, and the child that the servant bears becomes the wife's possession, her child, not the servant's, and now she's got a family. Now she's got, and that's legal code for a barren wife. Because and that's it. Well, why do you make that? Because the wife was dependent on a husband and children. Without a husband, she's a widow. But no problem, I've got a family. But your husband dies, no family, where there should be social security. There should be a social network somehow. There was. Have a family. I mean, it's like, well, why didn't they care about the women? They did. And that's why the law was, if she's barren and her husband dies, she's lost. So she can take a servant or someone beneath her and have her produce a child, and she now has the legal right to that child. That is her inheritance. It's like, well, so what Sarah was doing was like, what a wicked thing. That doesn't even, now again, Tony and I have talked about that. It's like, don't even go there. But it's like, that was the law. I mean, and it goes on and on, like the things you see Abram doing and the contracts they make, it's all written up here in these cuneiform tablets. So, here we go. He says, brothers and fathers, hear me, the God of glory, and this would be a God of glory, that would be God. But remember, no one has ever seen God except the one who came from heaven, who is going back to heaven, which is the Son of God. So now we're dealing with the Trinity. No one has ever seen God the Father, but anytime there's been a communication with mankind from God, it's always been the second member of the Trinity, known in John as the Logos, the Word, the rational expression. So anytime God chooses to express himself to man, and God is there, it's the second member of the Trinity, which makes complete sense. If God is going to become a man, the Logos is going to be born a seed of the woman, and now you've got Jesus Christ. It's like, well, that's all right. It's all exactly. No one's ever seen God, but when God manifests himself, it's the second member of the Trinity, which is God himself, who's been with the Father from the beginning, who is God himself. He can now appear. And you're going to have throughout the Bible, whenever you say no one's ever seen God, it becomes confusing because Adam did and Eve did. They walked with the Lord. Well, they were walking with the Logos. They were walking with the second member of the Trinity. Or when here, the God of glory appeared. So who appeared? This would be, in our term, in Christian terms, hear me, the God of glory appeared, Jesus appeared to our father Abraham. Now again, Jesus has its own meaning because Jesus is the Logos in bodily form. He's now become a man. So in a sense, the Son of God has always existed. The Logos has always existed. Be careful as I say this. Jesus has not always existed because Jesus is the Logos in the man. Now right there I just entered into Arianism, which is a heretical statement because Jesus has always existed as the Logos, the second member of the Trinity has always existed, but you couldn't find Jesus because Jesus had to be born into history through Mary, so he's got a body, so he's a man. But the person that is Jesus has lived in eternity forever. Does that make sense? So it's like, so that they argue the Arianism and Athanasius, is God eternal. The Jehovah Witnesses mess it up. They think God created Jesus along with his brother, Satan, Lucifer. But anyway, that's the Mormons too. But nonetheless, when Jesus was born, that was the same thing, the Son of God manifesting to humanity and create. That's why Jesus could say to the religious leaders, and you remember this in John, he says, you are slaves. You're slaves. You follow your father there. They says, and they were really stupid. They says, we've never been slaves to anyone. You're a Jew in 30 A.D. talking to the Messiah in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. We've never been slaves to anybody. It's like, does that even deserve a response? Have you read Exodus? Do you remember the Maccabean revolt? Rome occupies your land right now. You're like one breath away from being sold into slavery. But nevertheless, he says, And then he says, Abraham would have listened to me. He says, I saw Abraham's day, and he would have listened to me, but you won't. They says, now we know you're crazy. You claim to have seen, they understood exactly what he says. They understood Jesus to say that he had seen and spoken with Abraham. And this says, now we know you're crazy, you're demon-possessed, because Abraham, you're not yet 50 years old, and you claim to have talked with Abraham. And she says, well, duh, before Abraham was, I am. It's like, before Abraham was, I am the eternal Logos. And so it's not too hard for me to show up and say, hey, what's going on, Abraham? And then later on, become born into a body of a man and be here talking to you. It's like, yes, Jesus is only 30 years old, but the Son of God who's there is, I am. I mean, I always exist. So that's kind of exciting when you look at that. Brothers and fathers, Stephen says, hear me, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham. And Jesus confirmed this in his own teaching. And this is not the only time the God of glory is going to appear to Abraham. There's going to be several times in this account in Genesis where the God of glory is going to walk in. One day he walks in with two angels, and they see three men coming, and they prepare a meal for him. They sit out there and they eat. They talk to each other. The God of glory appeared to our father Abram when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, go out from your land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you. So leave your land. You're supposed to leave Mesopotamia. Leave your kindred. That means leave your people. Also, often said household. You're going to leave. You're breaking with your country. You're breaking with your family. And you're going somewhere I'm going to show you. And again, the reason for this is the land. He's going to give him you're going to leave this land. You're no longer part of this land, Mesopotamia. You're no longer part of this family. We're going to give you a new family. You're going to become a new family, which is going to eventually produce a new nation. And there you got right here, the Abrahamic covenant and the Palestinian covenant right there. You're done with this land. You're done with this family. Now notice, he sent, he didn't want to marry his son Isaac to marry a Canaanite, so he sent Eliezer back to get someone from his family to marry Isaac. And same thing, Jacob went up and got a couple ladies, 4 ladies, to be his wife, and their concubines or whatever, their assistants. And so they're still drawing from this. But the point there is Abraham is not going to be a continuation of his father Terah and the nation that's forming from him. He's breaking and going to form his own nation, which is very important in biblical history. He's not going to be one of the Gentile nations. Then he went out, now this is Stephen talking about him, then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans, that's the early name for the Babylonians, and lived in Haran. And after his father died, Terah, his father died, God removed him from there into this land in which you are now living. Yet, okay, so now the book Genesis is going to give us more details of this. He says now he's living here. Now this is Stephen saying, yet he gave him no inheritance in it, where he buries Sarah at the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron today. There's still Herodian stones built around the tomb, and if you go in there, you can't get in there. I've never been able to get in there. They say there's an ancient tomb buried that goes back to the time of Abraham, and they believe if they could excavate it, they'd be able to find the original tomb, because it's been marked since Abraham's day. And he bought that land. He bought that plot of land for a place to bury his family. So he did buy that much. God removed him from there into the land which you are now living. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give it to him as a possession and to his offspring after him, though he had no child at that time. And God spoke, so right there, I'm going to give this to your descendants. And Abraham's thinking, as you know, I have no children. They're 70 years old when they leave here, 75 years old when they leave here, and 99. Abraham's 99 years old, 100 years old. 100 years old when Isaac is born, 99 when he's told that he's going to be born. So they'd gone through 100 years. I've got all these promises, but who am I going to give it to? He'd resolved that he's going to give it to Eliezer. He's going to give it because if you have no inheritance, no heirs, according to these laws of the Hittites and the Ugaritic text, you could choose a servant. You'd adopt your servant and give the land to the servant. And God spoke to this effect, that his offspring would be sojourners in this land belonging to others and would enslave them and afflict them 400 years. I mean, you're going to have offspring, but they're going to be gone for 400 years. In fact, they're going to end up in slavery. But then he says, but God says, but I will judge the nation that they serve, that'd be the Egyptians, and after that they shall come out and worship me in this place. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abram became the father of Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob the 12 patriarchs. And that is Stephen in 30 A.D. recounting what they understood in the New Testament understanding of what's taking place with Abraham. Now, on your notes, and we're going to have to pick up with this in some fashion next week, I've got right here the outline of Abraham's life. And if you notice right there, it starts in chapter 11, goes up to chapter 23, and it's got everything written out there. Again, if we read through that, it's going to take us a long time because I will stop and explain stuff because I'm a teacher, and we may never get to this. So I'm not sure how we're going to handle this, but we do need to somehow break it down. So let's, in the last few moments here, just go to Genesis 11. Genesis 11, and this is a nice place to at least look at this, because the continuity of this, of the Bible, is there. It's consistent. We've got the time before the flood. We've got Seth, and we've got Enoch, and we've got Noah. And then we're going to have the flood. Excuse me, Seth, Abel. I've been struggling with that all day. Why, I don't know. You've got the flood coming right here. And then after the flood, Noah gets off the ark. Shem, Ham, and Japheth get off with him. And they repopulate the earth right here. Now, according to the story of Genesis, but also according to many stories around the world, and again, if we would be honest and scientifically look at this, I think we would find some interesting things that could verify this if we would, but it doesn't match our paradigm of what we want, especially in a postmodern age. As they come off this, they're going to start having generations going to be born during this time period. And soon after that, within about 100 years, they're going to get organized in the Middle East there and build the Tower of Babel. And they think they've located that place. There's a huge platform that they've excavated that's not been built on, but it's ready for a huge ziggurat, and they think that they've discovered it matches a lot of the details. At that point, God confused the languages, and people went out, and they could no longer communicate. Also, Peleg was alive in those days, and his name has to do with the word canal, water canal, and it says, in Peleg's day, the earth was divided, which would mean the continental plates after the flood were still settling down. We're about 100 years away from the flood, and it's still the water's been draining off. The atmosphere is still coming into balance, because it would have been a very, very, wet atmosphere if there was actually a flood, and the temperature would have changed. Polar caps are freezing. All these things taking place. And at Babel, it may have been the final shifting of the continental plates, and now the different languages and different people groups are scattered around the earth. And then we're going to have some generations. And one of those generations is going to be Terah, coming right off that. So if you look in chapter 11, if you look in chapter 9, that's the flood. They're getting off the ark in chapter 9. Chapter 10 is the table of nations. There are 70 nations, and that's a key number, 70. One, it means complete. But also 70 it plays into the mythology also, which probably is rooted in truth, of the angelic beings that are ruling the nations. But anyway, that's chapter 10, the 70 nations. And then chapter 11 is probably taking place right, within 100 years of that is the Tower of Babel, chapter 11, and talks about the earth being, divided up in languages. And then chapter 11, verse 10. This is the account of Shem. Now, when it says this is the account, the word account means this is the written document. It comes from a word that means scrape, that was used to scrape bark off of a tree, and bark would be used to write on. So this is it. This says in the text, this is the account. It says this is the written document of Shem. And this is not the first time. It's called the Toledot formula in the Hebrew. You can see this in all these things. This is the account, and I could go back and show you this is the account of Noah. Nonetheless, this is the account of Shem after Noah. 2 years after the flood, Shem was 100 years old, and he became the father, and it goes all the way through. If you look over in it keeps going. Verse 18, when Peleg had lived 30 years, he became the father of Reuel, and after he became the father of Reuel, Peleg lived 209 years. Goes on down here, just keeps going. And you're about 10 generations in or so. In verse 24, when Nahor, and that name is going to pop up because that is where Rebekah and the wives are going to come through Nahor, because Nahor lived 29 years. He became the father of Terah. Now Terah is the father of Abram. And after he became the father of Terah, Nahor lived 119 years, and he had other sons and daughter. After Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So he's got 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Verse 27, this is the account, the Toledot, or this is the written document of Terah. Terah became, we're going to just read this and we'll be done for the day. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. Okay? While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died, that's one of his sons, died in Ur of the Chaldeans, in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. That's going to come up later in the story, because that's where Rebekah is going to come from. She was the daughter of Haran, and the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, and she had no children. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. Now that is straight up interesting. Over here in Ur is Terah decides he's going to go up to Haran and go to the land of Canaan. And so there's already something in motion there that he's moving out. And now it's going to pick up in chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord had said to Abram, maybe, Abram was the instigator of this. The Lord had said, notice past tense. It doesn't say like it's a story. This is all taking place. Terah is leaving Ur to go to Haran, to go to Canaan. And why? Well, the Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. If you read Stephen's account, the Lord of glory appeared to him and told him, leave these people. And that may have been what instigated Terah to say, hey, let's get out of here, let's go up and let's follow this plan. And that really wasn't the plan, because they're trying to leave behind all these people and start afresh with a new nation in Abram. And that's where this is going to pick up. And you've got a promise right here. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. So however that came to pass, I want you to keep in mind, Terah is aware of it. God of glory appeared to Abram in Ur, and he was confident. I mean, it wasn't an impression. It was some manifestation that took place. He appeared to Abram, and Abram is going to share the information, or Terah's going to find out about it, and they begin the journey up here to go to the land of Canaan. But on the way, people die, people stay behind, and finally, after 5 years in Haran, Abram's going to take his people, and it's going to say while he was in Haran, he got even more people and more animals. Meaning he got more and more servants. He's getting richer. He's leaving rich, coming to Haran wealthy. He's leaving Haran wealthy, gets down here, and he's going to end up in Egypt getting more. It's phenomenal, the wealth and the power that Abram's got. It's really a different story. But the whole thing is he's following Yahweh through this. So we'll pick this up next week. We've got to quit. And then, again, the important part about this is he's living by faith. He's neck deep in the world. He's got possessions. He's in charge of people. He's fighting wars. He's traveling. But yet there's something he's looking for. Everything that he sees here, it's like there's something bigger than this. So it's just an interesting example that you've got right here. The father of the Jewish faith, the father of the Christian faith. Father, do thank you for the chance to look into these things. We ask that we would handle them diligently, that we would not read too much into the stories, that we would stay true to your word and true to history and the things that have been revealed. We ask, Father, that we'd be able to apply it to our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for your time.